My name is Susanne Dirks. I'm manager for the Centre for Economic Development Research here in Dublin, which is part of the IBM Institute for Business Value, and we basically do research into economic development issues and the relationship between economic development and ICT, and then publish thought leadership type material on the research we do. E-Readiness is, it defines basically how amenable a nation is to availing of the e-commerce, IT, opportunity and using it to improve the economy of the country.
Could you give us a summary of your report came out, I think, in the middle of last month. Just a summary of where Ireland's position is might be useful.
Ireland is in place number 21. That's like the same position as last year. The year before they had dropped a little bit, so I think it's good news that Ireland was able to maintain its position, and also Ireland increased its score, which is good news as well.
Excellent. Okay, so really there's only two questions left, but they're the biggest ones. So the first is, in your report you were quite specific about the strengths. You said that Ireland had a very convivial business environment and a legal environment that attracted and kept business here in the digital sector. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there are two strengths where Ireland stands out, and even so Ireland is in place number 21. They are actually in the top 10 for those two areas. Business environment.
Top 10 globally, is it?
Globally, yeah, which I think is great news for somebody who's in place 21. The business environment, we look at the overall business environment, macroeconomic, the kind of legal positioning to some cases, the marketplace, etc. So there's a range of factors in terms of what the status is for the next 3 to 5 years. So Ireland has one of the highest scores in that area, which is great news. The other area is the legal environment, and here we look at the general legal environment, but also specific legislation that enables the use of the internet and makes the use of the internet easier. And once again, Ireland is scoring very high in that area.
What kind of legislation is that? I mean, is that intellectual property rights?
Intellectual property rights would be one of the areas. Censorship would be another area, and the overall framework for e-signature and things like that. But the one that stood out for Ireland was obviously the FDI policy. It was, I think it was top of all countries. And also obviously the macroeconomic environment was very good. The overall political environment was very good. So some real strengths here. Okay,
very good. And so now to the bad news. You also didn't hold back from identifying what the negative aspects were. You said there was a deficit in government vision. So I'll ask you about that before the infrastructure question separately.
And the government vision here, we measure basically how the government supports the development of e-readiness. And there's a couple of criteria such as government strategy, ICT strategy, government spend on ICT. Now, Ireland is not bad in any of these criteria. What the problem here is the competition within, especially the EU, is very tight. So Ireland is kind of mediocre within Europe, so it's just not doing well enough given the fierce competition that is here.
Okay, which leads us to the third question, the second part of the third question, I should say, which is about infrastructure. And this is something where the government has been catching quite a lot of flack for quite a while. So
and I guess this doesn't come out as news, really.
No.
And it's a bit more clear-cut than in the government vision case in terms of Ireland really having some definite weak points here. The infrastructure is very much around the technical criteria such as broadband penetration, mobile penetration, PC availability, internet users, etc. So within those criteria, the ones stand out for Ireland as negative ones is obviously the broadband. That won't be new news. Another thing that we measure is around e-identity, where Ireland is scoring quite poorly still.
Is this use of ID cards?
This is, like you have in Estonia, for example, or Hong Kong is very strong in this area. And a lot of countries are making very fast progress here, so Ireland is being left behind a little bit. And then you have kind of mediocre kind of data for some of the other categories, such as spread of PCs, internet users, etc. So I think a few very clear weak points that can be addressed because they're very specific.
Well, follow-on question then from the last question. We have about 4 minutes left. Is one of the really great things about the E-Readiness report is that it doesn't just tell one nation where it stands. Mm-hmm. It tells them where it stands with respect to every other nation. It puts it in a context.
I think that's, sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, this is one of the benefits. So looking at first the government vision question, and then looking at the infrastructure question, who stood out as models that Ireland could follow?
On the government vision, there is a couple of countries. Obviously, the Nordic countries are very strong in this area. And what we have seen last year in particular is that the whole developed Asia Pacific is really getting very active in this area, and that's why you
what are they doing?
Asia Pacific countries moving forward.
What is it that they're doing? Is it that they're funding R&D, or they're setting up innovation parks that are impressive? Or
funding is definitely one big part of it, but it's typically the overall government strategy and implementing that strategy and moving forward with it. And when you look at Ireland, where it scores, because that's one of the more qualitative criteria, it's, yes, there is a strategy, but to what extent is it being, driven forward, executed, etc.
Right.
That's where the gap is.
Okay. And then on the infrastructure side, and for example, the OECD reported early last month that we could expect broadband speeds to be, 50 megabytes both ways between 2010 and 2020. Presumably there are places where this is already happening, and Ireland isn't one of them. so who are the big performers in that area?
Switzerland is the real winner in this area, and has been for the last couple of years. Switzerland has lost out on some other areas like government policy this year, but they're still once the infrastructure is in place, it's obviously there. And you just need to continue to improve it. So that's one country. And then within the specific criteria, you have quite a bit of variety. For example, US, which is number one, isn't even that strong on broadband, but they're stronger in other areas. So, it depends on the specific criteria you're looking at. A lot of countries, what I find interesting, are making good progress on Wi-Fi, and it's something that can be done relatively fast.
WiMAX or Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi, particularly. Okay. So you can see the progress within a year, and a lot of countries are doing good on taking a lot of action around e-identity. So that's
yes.